The breaking news today is that late on Tuesday, August the 15th, the U.S. District Court, Northern District of Mississippi, released basically their findings and what they decided to do with the court case of Will McRaney versus the North American Mission Board. What they did was they dismissed it. Now, we're going to take a moment to look at that. Let me give you some comment, a little bit of commentary on exactly what's taken place and what possible next steps are in this case. Southern Baptists who have been keeping track of this have watched this particular case go to multiple courts, have multiple results. Even the North American Mission Board petitioned the United States Supreme Court in this case as well. So none of those are good things when you look at it from the perspective of a Southern Baptist and trying to work cooperatively together in that for sure. Well, let's take a quick look at a couple of things. First, let's look at the actual court documents. If you'll look at the court documents for just a second, there are a couple of things, and we're not going to go through the entire document. It's 14, 15 pages long, but this is the memorandum where they start off with it basically stating the history and the background. But this is the key point. And this is the argument that the North American Mission Board has made toward the McRaney case all along, and that is that their analysis is that they are wanting to claim and have claimed ecclesiastical doctrine, this abstention doctrine. And what this basically means, as explained above, as they have just explained, that this doctrine is rooted in the First Amendment's free exercise clause and is built out of numerous Supreme Court cases affirming that churches have the power to decide for themselves, free from the state interference, matters of church government, as well as those of faith and doctrine, which basically means, if you're kind of trying to keep up with all of this, it basically means that the court is not going to step in and make a decision for your church. Now, in this particular case, and we'll examine this a little bit more in just a moment from some of the other published comments, but basically this is claiming that basically everything that Southern Baptists do together is one church. In fact, the North American Mission Board has actually used that language as they have argued this case ahead, as they've moved forward in several of the courts as well. So let's look again at exactly what this is saying now. They further go ahead and state that for the reasons that the court has stated, that they find that under the First Amendment, it lacks the subject matter jurisdiction to adjudicate this dispute. In order to adjudicate the plaintiff's claims, in other words, Dr. McRaney's claims, the court would need necessarily to be required to interpret and decide matters of church government, as well as those of faith and doctrine, which the Supreme Court has already held encroaches on a church's power to decide for themselves, free from state interference at that point. Now, if we go on, I'm going to look at a couple of different articles. First, the Baptist paper, which is out of Alabama, and they wrote this article late yesterday on the McRaney suit against NAMB, and it's dismissed by the U.S. District Court. Will McRaney versus the North American Mission Board lawsuit, initially filed in 2017, was dismissed today, August 15th, by the U.S. District Court, Northern District of Mississippi, Aberdeen Division. The plaintiff's claims in this lawsuit will clearly require the court to inquire into religious matters and decision-making to a degree that is simply impermissible under the Constitution and the ecclesiastical abstention doctrine, states the summary judgment report. Now, real quickly, let me pause and say the North American Mission Board has repeatedly sought to get a summary judgment at several different court levels as this has been appealed and taken back and forth to various courts. They've asked for a summary judgment. It's repeatedly been turned down. Now that it's been put back in this U.S. District Court, Northern District of Mississippi, they have now acted on this summary court judgment, which is against Will McRaney, the plaintiff, and so basically it's in favor of the North American Mission Board at this point. Now, to look at this again, what we see as they continue to talk about this in this article, this particular article in the Baptist paper is written by Jennifer Rash. So she continues and says, also, the court stated it agrees with NAMB that Mississippi state courts also clearly lack subject matter jurisdiction to adjudicate this dispute. Now, basically what this means is that the court is not going to pass this on. That's an easy way of saying it. They're not going to hand it off from this U.S. District Court to a local state court, because what they're determining at the U.S. District Court level is that the state court couldn't do anything different than what they're doing because they won't have any more information. Now, understand at this juncture, none of these courts have seen all of the evidence that has been gathered. They have not been exposed to that. That would come out in a jury trial, which has been scheduled for this fall. And that's not going to happen now because they've dismissed this at this point. Now, if we go back and look again, we're going to see that the court in this ruling, as Jennifer Rash shows us in her article here, shows us that the further thing that we see is at the outset, NAMB has consistently held that the accusations against their ministry are unfounded. Said, we have also argued that as Christian ministries, NAMB and others involved in this case should be protected by the First Amendment and should not be forced to endure scrutiny and intrusive examination of the courts. Now, also coming out yesterday afternoon late, early evening, Baptist News Global and Mark Wingfield wrote this article. I'm going to link both of these articles in the video description so you can see that when you get that and can look at the video description. But it simply says, in short, the court believes McRaney's claims fall under the ecclesiastical exemption doctrine, a legal philosophy based on the First Amendment that says civil courts may not adjudicate on internal church matters. Now, one of the things that you need to understand here is this term church and how they've used church repeatedly. I'll come back to that in a moment. Now, this basically, this whole case hinges back upon what happened when McRaney was terminated from the convention there in Maryland, Delaware. So that happened in 2016, and they're now arguing that the court doctrine does not apply because he was not an employee of NAMB. Therefore, the pressure NAMB leadership or the pressure that NAMB leadership exerted on the BCMD, which is the state convention in Maryland, Delaware, to remove him was a matter of defamation and not an internal church governance matter. All entities are autonomous, and this is speaking of SBC entities, are all autonomous, unlike Methodists or Catholics who embrace a connectional form of government. Now, this is critical for us to pick up on right now, because what is happening right now, and we see this, is that the precedent is being set for a connectional type of government in the SBC. Now, when the ERLC submitted their amicus brief to the Supreme Court, they used the terminology of there is a hierarchy. They went back and corrected it later. Doesn't matter. It was already in the record. Okay. And North American Mission Board has repeatedly used the term of as a church, we as a church, giving the implication that they're like, or that we as Southern Baptists are like the Catholic groups. And we're not. We're not a denomination even. That's the wrong terminology. When you hear somebody say Southern Baptists are a denomination, we're not. We're a convention of cooperative churches. But as Charles Kelly, he wrote in his book, which he recently put out, we'll put a link to that down in the description as well. But in his book, The Best Intentions, he goes back and identifies, since the Great Commission resurgence was passed back in 2010, that the North American Mission Board started moving toward a centralized approach. They started taking away the church planting responsibilities from the state. They basically obliterated all evangelism in the state conventions and in other locations as well. And they've now started coming back to that a little bit. I guess basically Kevin Ezell, number of years back now, I'd have to look it up when it was, but he did a podcast with his friend Jimmy Scroggins down in Florida. And one of the things he said in that podcast was that when he came into NAMB, he was going to have to blow it all up to be able to get it like it needed to be. Now, that wasn't like it had historically been. It wasn't like Southern Baptists had intended for it to be. It wasn't even the same mission statement that, or he wasn't moving toward the same mission statement that Southern Baptists have worked under for all these years. So the reality is, they were trying to move this toward a centralized type of an organization where they're calling the shots. We see that repeatedly even now, when they have now removed a lot of the funding from state conventions so that they could now control what's happening. The problem with that is no longer are we having a cooperative type of an organization where different entities are cooperating together, but the North American Mission Board has put themselves in a position where they're trying to dictate what happens. In fact, many state conventions don't even know how many church planters are in their states, that are funded by the North American Mission Board. And that's a real problem. Used to, we had at least that level of transparency. But in the area of transparency, many of the things that both Dr. McRaney and others have been calling out is the lack of financial transparency. Multiple conventions now, there have been people try to get to the floor a motion or an amendment or something to try to have transparency, financial transparency from the North American Mission Board and some of our other entities as well. And that's not been taking place either. So let's go on and look at the last part of what is said here as Baptist Global Mark Wingfield continues to write. As he writes here, I made that too small for myself to read. Hang on just a second. Let's put that big again. There we go. Now I can read it. Makes it where I can see it. He says, making such a ruling would be a clear violation of First Amendment and the ecclesiastical extension doctrine. It is indeed a quintessential example of an internal management decision that is left under the Constitution entirely to the discretion of the church. He's again quoting from the court documents at that point. And let's move on to the last thing I want to show you from this part. He closes by saying this ruling strengthens Ezel's hand. Listen closely to what he says. I think he's hitting the nail on the head. He says, the ruling strengthens Ezel's hand in an ongoing battle with leaders of other state Baptist conventions who charge Ezel has diverted millions of dollars in former partnership money from them to his own control for a nationwide church planting strategy that is producing worse results and not better. And this is part of the argument that Kevin Ezel has not responded to repeatedly. Dr. McRaney has made this charge. Randy Adams, when he was running for president and since of the Southern Baptist Convention, he has made this same claim. In fact, they're one of the conventions that the North American Mission Board has removed money from them and basically says, if you want money, you have to appeal to us for a specific thing and we'll approve or not approve. And historically, we've always had partnerships where we agreed we're going to share this amount of cooperative program dollars, and then the conventions work in response to that as they work cooperatively together on those funds that are given by Southern Baptists. Now, here's our problem. Here's what we're going to see happening if we're not careful. In fact, very, very careful at this point. What we're going to see happen is we're going to see a shift to not only a lack of cooperation, but this connectedness, this connectivity. Because here's what's going to happen, especially as we've looked at some of these sexual abuse cases and other things. Let's stay away from sexual abuse for a moment. Let's say an individual trips going down the stairs of your church and they realize that the railing is a little bit weak. So they file suit against the church. This could be a member, it could be a non-member, but they file suit against your church. Well, now they're going to look at it and say, well, you know, there's already some precedents in court cases, the Supreme Court and other cases now where Southern Baptist entities have put this hierarchical kind of screen over what Southern Baptists are doing. And so now they're going to go back and sue other churches in the associational area because we're all connected. They're going to sue the association. They're going to sue your state convention, and then they will also sue the executive committee or the Southern Baptist Convention as a whole, because these connective lines are together. We're no longer seen as autonomous and separated. So here's what you need to do in your church. You need to make sure that you have very clearly identified in your constitution and bylaws that your church works independently of any other church. You choose to cooperate with other churches in your area. You choose to cooperate with your local association. You choose to cooperate with the Southern Baptist Convention and your state convention. Those are all great partnerships. That's great for you to do, but make sure it's clearly identified in your Constitution and bylaws, in your guiding documents, that you are not under the authority and you do not have to respond just because those other entities are doing something a certain way. Now, even when it comes to your Baptist faith and message, you need to clearly identify this is what we believe. It's not just because it's a convention-wide kind of thing, because in the legal courtroom, they are going to have a hard time understanding the difference between a denomination, which has authority over all of those churches under it and any part of the organization under it, and a convention of churches, which are going to respond totally differently, because we need to be responding cooperatively, working together, not being ruled over by North American Mission Board or any other group as far as that goes. So I hope you'll take those kind of proactive steps. Dynamic Church Ministries, where I represent, we're glad to help you with that, glad to help you with the Constitution, bylaws, do assessments and all kinds of other things with that. I'm not going to go into all that right now, but we're glad to help if there's some way we can help you. But you need to make sure on the church level, the associational level, and the state convention level, you have made very clear. So if you end up in court and the court says, we want to see your documents, what is it that you determine you're going to do? They see from each of those organizations, we are an autonomous organization, we are independent and not under the authority of the North American Mission Board or any other group. Well, to me, this is a very sad thing that's happened. We've seen it kind of go up and down. There is only one more thing I think that can potentially happen, and that is this can be appealed now to the U.S. Fifth Circuit Court down in New Orleans. They've been before that court once before and overturned the appeal that they brought forth because of the U.S. District Court there in Mississippi. So that could happen again, but it's a whole lot of our Southern Baptist Cooperative Program dollars being spent by the North American Mission Board, hiring high-powered lawyers and then going to court over and over and over again when it ought to have been worked out. And McRaney has repeatedly said he's willing to sit down and work it out if they'll simply talk to him, but they've ignored him up until this point, is what we understand. So, all right, you have a good day. We'll try to keep you up to date on other things that are happening along with this particular case and other issues that are happening in the Southern Baptist Convention as well. Thank you for joining us for this update on this sad news in my case, as far as my opinion goes. All right, have a good day.